Hello all, I hope you're doing well. The far right is one of those phrases I like to call a word spell, the sort of phrases that are bandied about in the modern political arena, and whoever speaks them aloud immediately damns someone as immediately guilty, as morally suspect, as evil. This is why quite untrustworthy people like to use these phrases with abandon. They're a powerful substitute for an actual argument. You don't have to put in any intellectual effort, and they can put you in the driving seat of a given debate. However, the downside is that these phrases can lose their power with overuse. A good example of this is the ace card of all word spells, being racist. That started off as simply hating someone for having a different colour skin tone to you. Of course, that's absurd and crazy. I don't think anybody would really defend that. And then it got morphed into unconscious bias because everybody was being called racist and very few people actually hate someone for the colour of their skin. As I say, that would be insane. So they had to shift it. However, that became more and more absurd and people started to question that one. So it became, well, you've got to be anti-racist. That makes a good person. But people worked out eventually that means, well, if you're not left-wing, we're just going to call you racist to control you. This leads us to the point we're at now where someone's called racist and most of us just assume they're just saying something sensible about migration or multiculturalism. Of course there is a downside here. I'm not pro any cruelty to anyone, I'm sure you're not either, but we have to remember the leftists, the liberals have completely obfuscated the meaning of racism, so it's basically completely meaningless now. Now, I believe the same process is underway with the term far right at this point. There are three major problems as I see it. Number one, is it really far right, or are you just using that word spell to try and control the narrative and lie to the public in order to emotionally manipulate them? Number two, when you say far right, are you actually describing a political ideology, or have you moved into the post-religious theology of the age? I speak about this a great deal, well exemplified by this still that a student took from one of his lectures. As you can see, this is what youngsters are taught. The left is rational, egalitarian, internationalist, progressive. The right is a rational, racist, nationalist, retrogressive. I think it's quite evident here, these youngsters and our culture at large aren't being taught about political philosophy at this point, they're being led into a cult-like pseudo-religion. And once you start wading through this, you get to the most important point, which many people are now asking, which is, well, what exactly is wrong with being far-right anyway? I mean, alright, I get the sort of hateful Nazi skinhead foaming at the mouth type cliche, but that's actually very rare. But what about if someone is, quote, far-right, and they say, mass immigration's got out of control, and I'm worried about illegal immigration because some of these people are coming over here and committing sexual assaults against children. Now, does that position automatically become evil and wrong because that person is far right? It seems to me what matters most here is what's true and what's not true. And it seemed to me for a while now that mass immigration is out of control, that the public have said they don't want any more and still get more time and time again, that sexual attacks have been happening from migrants that have recently arrived. Now, I would say these instances are neither left nor right, they're just a description of what's been going on, but because they're critical of migration through the liberal frame, they automatically become far right, and far right equals evil, so they cannot be said. And this creates this crazy situation we're in now where the powers that be refuse to talk about or act on the concerns of the public because they're, quote, far right, and they continue on with their progressive liberal utopian dream. They seem to believe that just more mass immigration and state propaganda will fix everything because they're the rational, non-hateful, liberal centrists. Of course, the reality is that to the public, they're increasingly strange and radical themselves. As I've said, we've asked again and again for them to limit migration and they just ignore us. In fact, they double it and call us racist if we complain. They've shown that they're completely undemocratic in their makeup and then they wonder why people are losing faith in the system and moving towards the right. Now, I lived in London for 10 years and have been around these people, and you have to understand how they think. They're very sheltered and they live very deluded utopian lives. They're still in the Blairite glow of 1997 and they have no sympathy at all with the general public. To them, diversity is just a minority of people they went to Oxford and Cambridge with. It's their colleagues in their workplaces from international dynasties. They're endless servants that clean their houses and serve them their coffees in Pret. And it's so ironic because they speak about all this white privilege as if they're so caring without recognising their own innate privilege towards their own people. And this is why they come up with nonsense like this. This is the Liberal Hub news agent speaking about how far-right things are getting in the country.
You feel that there is a moral panic at the moment, that this is kind of unprecedented and that things have spiralled and spun out of...
Spiral is the right word. There's
It's
this
just
sense of
gone
spiraling,
mad. It's gone terribly out of control in the past few... Well, no, it's been a continuation of what we've had for years. It's just the language which is being used now is different.
Bigger problem as well with mainstream conservative centre-right politicians moving, as I say, galloping with the Overton window to what used to be the preserve of the radical right. Because what that means is that, what is left for the actual far right? Where do they go? Well, they move even further to the right. And, you can see this in terms of anyone who's been on X recently can see the level of profound racism, which would once have been confined to the darkest corners of the mainstream internet and mainstream discourse, wouldn't have even been in public discourse, is so virulent, so ubiquitous, being rehearsed and rehashed by people who have got shows on television news channels and huge online followings and certain academics, quote unquote, so repeating and regurgitating this stuff.
It's just unbelievable how detached these people are. They sit in their central London fancy media offices getting high on the liberal stench of their own farts. It baffles the mind how they cannot fathom that the general public have said again and 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 again they don't want more mass immigration. They don't want more state propaganda about diversity and how wonderful it is and how evil they are. This isn't some ghoulish ideological shift that the British and the European people are suddenly going under. It's that the powers that be have ignored us for so long that people are now starting to think and act differently because they have no choice. And to be clear, if people out there are using vulgar language and slurs against people, I'm not pro any of that. As I say, I'm not pro the cruelty, but the reality is if you enforce mass immigration endlessly on a nation, tell the host people that they're evil and should hang their head in shame, and to celebrate other cultures all the time, it's going to create a mess. But what really bugs me about these people is how they can't come out of their utopian, narcissistic, Blairite liberal frame, even for a moment, to try and see that maybe it's not the public that have just magically started radicalising. Maybe it's their actions that have driven the public to this. Maybe they're the radical ones. But the mainstream media will just never drop this frame because it's everything it has to believe in to fulfill its deluded worldview. Here's a still from Newsnight recently speaking about illegal immigration. Just look at the lineup. You got the chief economist at the Bank of England. You got a young black lad who looks barely old enough to get to university and a woman in a sari. I mean, do you really think shows like this represent the views of the average Brit? I mean, if we think the average Brit is some trendy who lives in Islington or the Northern Quarter in Manchester, then maybe. As always, the average right-wing opinion is implied as evil and twisted and disgusting. And even on this show, this young lad, I don't want to be mean to him, he's obviously wheeled out by the BBC for the sympathy vote, but he states that asylum seekers waiting for their applications to be approved should be allowed to work. But if they have the right to work, then they have a national insurance number, and if they have that, then they have a right to reside, which is effectively just a path to citizenship, which is going to promote more illegal immigration. But the media is like this because the liberal power structure is firmly in control. It's why even the supposed rebels to the liberal system that are leading the revolution still will play up to the liberal mainstream, as Nigel Farage has done recently in stating that some trans men should be allowed in women's prisons. This has given birth to memes such as this, where you see Nigel Farage fighting the trans cause in opposition with hyper-liberals such as Keir Starmer and J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling, by the way, has claimed that reform has gone woke too now. I guess this shows J.K. Rowling herself has moved to the far right now, and if we're to the right of her, what does that make us? The super mega evil fascist crazy far mega right. My point being that the whole thing's just getting stupid, isn't it? I mean, these liberals are so stubborn in their worldview, they refuse to admit that they're just wrong, that everything around them has to get increasingly evil and far right. I think all of this fits into the decline of the liberal frame that we're witnessing at present. It seems that the political ideologies through which we try and understand the world increasingly don't map onto reality. The left and right dynamic increasingly doesn't make sense. It seems to me that in the future, what's most important is what is true and what unifies. Anyway, these are some of my thoughts. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel.